Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar hosted by Secura. I'm here today with my colleague, Anna Prudnikova, Team Manager for Product Certification. Anna.
Yes, hi everyone, welcome. So my name is Anna. I've been working in Secura for over 4 years now, working on the topic of product certification with focus on automotive and industrial products. And overall, I've been in cybersecurity for over 10 years now. So I've been working in different roles from a consultancy to audit, also doing some technical testing. And today I'm going to share some experience of what we learned with working with automotive vehicle manufacturers, but also suppliers. And we will focus on suppliers for today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anna. I'm Antonio Russu, Strategy and Business Development Manager here at Secura. Like Anna, I work in the automotive industry, work together with OEMs and suppliers in the industry across multiple countries, looking at different type of solution that we can offer them. Allow me to introduce you Secura. Secura is a company that is in cybersecurity since more than 20 years. We have a growing number of colleagues, currently above 150, and since 2021 we are part of the Bureau Veritas group. What we do is that we do assessment on cybersecurity, we do work to improve the cybersecurity standard, and approach this not just simply from a technology or product, but also people. Our current footprint is across multiple industries, like you can see on this slide, from technology to product manufacturers, from defense to public, finance, and industrial. What we are here today is discuss how to achieve cybersecurity compliance as an automotive supplier. In fact, in the automotive industry, the ecosystem forces you to actually be compliant with a number of standards, one of which under the UNECE and is the ISO standard 21434. So today, Anna is going to take us through this presentation, share with you what we have learned, what we know, what we practice with our clients all around the world. And we hope that this will also inspire you to open the door and the conversation with us about what is going to be happening. Allow me to remind you that we are entering the last 6 months prior to the implementation of the UNECE 155, 156, as well as the different type of ISO standards. So whatever your company is busy with or they are looking into, you still have a number of months that will allow you to actually prepare yourself for this transition. But enough from me, Anna. You have our undivided attention.
Perfect. Thanks you, Antonio. Okay, so let's start with agenda. Of course, I will remind everyone about UNECE and vehicle regulations. I will do it briefly. Then we will focus a bit on ISO 21434 standard, what it stands for, and why do we need it. Then we are going to mostly focus, of course, on the practical impact for automotive suppliers and how can you actually use ISO 21434 standard to reach the compliance and to prove the compliance for the vehicle manufacturers. Then briefly discuss some next steps for the regulation, and in the end, of course, we will have some time for a Q&A session. By the way, if you have any questions, there is a question box on the right side where you can post your questions, and in the end, Antonio will read them and then we will discuss them. So let's start with UNECE automotive regulations. First of all, what is UNECE regulations? So this is not only specific for cybersecurity. So UNECE regulations has been on the market for many years now, and they exist for different parts of the vehicle. So for brake system, airbags, lighting, tires, and so on. As you can imagine, the main focus was always safety. And historically, all the vehicle manufacturers were applying for type approval in a specific country where they were located. Based on 1958 agreement, all the countries actually agreed to have the international recognition. So in this case, if you have the type of approval in a specific country, then the same type approval is actually recognized in all the countries which are part of this agreement, and you can see it on the map on the slide. So in this case, it's all Europe, it's Australia, and then even some parts of Africa. While mostly the national approved authorities conduct assessment themselves, but they can also partially rely on technical service. And actually, Secura is this kind of technical service which can support companies to have the type approvals in place. So as I mentioned before, historically, the UNECE regulation was specifically focusing on safety. Only recently, because all the cars, they became way more connected, the focus started to go more towards cybersecurity. And we can see here on the slide as well how many things basically your car is currently connecting to, right? So we can see key fobs being connected. We also see that your personal data is now being processed within the vehicle. We also see the communication between vehicle to vehicle. You can also imagine that now, because of that, you can see the threats of the malware. So that led to the story that now it's time to actually start addressing the cybersecurity and not only to focus on safety, because cybersecurity threats can actually also lead to safety issues. If we are focusing specifically on R155 regulation, this is a regulation about cybersecurity. Currently, the scope of regulation includes vehicle for transport of passengers, vehicle for transport of goods, and trailers. So basically, more or less everything which has 4 wheels. An important part to keep in mind for R155 regulation that, well, cybersecurity is not only about the end product. So it's not only about securing the vehicle itself, but the whole life cycle of how the vehicle and all its components are produced. So we start from the development, we move to maintenance, and then also the removal from service. And what is really good about UNECE regulation, that it actually takes this into account. The regulation itself is not only about ticking the box and saying, well, we are compliant. It's actually about implementing good cybersecurity culture. And R155 has 2 main parts. So first part is called Cybersecurity Management System requirements, or so-called CSMS requirements. So we are going to refer further in the webinar to it as CSMS requirements. In this case, you show that the processes exist. And then there is another part is about vehicle type requirements, meaning that the processes which are implemented in CSMS are implemented in a specific vehicle. So if, for example, you have some requirements in how the vehicle should be developed, you need to show for each vehicle type that you actually followed your own certified procedures. So if we're talking about, let's say, the categories for CSMS requirements, because that's where we are going to focus today, because we are going to focus specifically on the supply chain. There are 4 types of main requirements. The first one is about security management. So in this case, we are talking about identifying the CSMS processes that we need to implement for the vehicle manufacturers. Then we are talking about risk identification and risk management. So we also talk about treatment options, how to test the mitigation. The next big category is incident response. So what is the action plan in case of a cyber attack? And the last big part, which is in our experience is the most complicated ones for both vehicle manufacturers but also suppliers, is the requirements for, let's say, suppliers. Because of course, if you can imagine, the vehicle manufacturer does not produce most of the components themselves. They rely a lot on different manufacturers, so they rely on different suppliers. So they do rely on tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. One of the requirements of regulation states that the vehicle manufacturer should be in controls of the risks coming from the supply chain. Well, the question is, how can they do it? Because they are not in control of the company. This is just their provider. So in this case, of course, the kind of standard way to do it is to have the contractual agreement in place between the vehicle manufacturer and the third-party suppliers in a way on how you can align on the processes and also how the evidence from suppliers and what type of evidence should be shared with vehicle manufacturers. So if we think about the regulation itself, of course, it is mandatory only for vehicle manufacturers, but we already discussed that vehicle manufacturers are mandated to be in control of their risks coming from suppliers. So of course, in this case, the suppliers, if they want to keep working with the vehicle manufacturers, they need to prove that they're actually compliant, that they are in control of their risks. So in this case, the compliance with UNECE R155 regulation for suppliers is basically driven by the market demand. And right now we are only in the beginning of the journey because the regulation has only been mandatory from 2022. So right now it's a bit complicated, so not everybody knows how to address those requirements. But we can imagine that in 2, 3, 4 years from now, there will be a standard way on how suppliers will be required to prove their compliance. And so far, the expectation is that it will be based on ISO 21434 standard. So that's what we are going to talk about today. A bit about let's say, the relationship between R155 and ISO 21434 standard. So for UNECE R155 regulation, there was created an official interpretation document, which basically provides an explanation of each requirement, of what type of evidence is required, what exactly the requirement means, and so on. It is important to understand, as with all the regulations, UNECE regulation is quite open to interpretation. Right? It just says that you need to be in control of the risk. It doesn't really say how you can do it. So that's why ISO 21434 plays a really important role as a standard, because it does give you the guidance on how to implement the requirements of UNECE regulation. And let's say, in order to prove that ISO 21434 is actually a good fit, there is even a link in the official interpretation document from the requirements from UNECE regulation to ISO 21434 standard. So now we are going to move to discuss ISO 21434 standard itself. First of all, what is the purpose of the standard and what actually it talks about? Well, this is a standard which is specifically developed for road vehicles, and the focus is cybersecurity engineering. The idea of the standard is to address the cybersecurity in engineering of electrical and electronic systems within the road vehicles. It should allow the engineering of those E&D systems to keep with state-of-the-art technology and evolving attack methods. It also provides vocabulary, objectives, requirements, and guidelines related to cybersecurity engineering. And an important thing to keep in mind, it doesn't refer to any specific technology or solution that are related to cybersecurity, but mostly focuses on good practices, on good processes and methodologies that you, as a vehicle manufacturer or supplier, can implement in order to have good cybersecurity culture in the company. So the scope of the standard describes cybersecurity from a perspective of a single item. So when we're talking about the item, we're talking about a single system or a single functionality of a vehicle. So as an example, you can imagine that brake system is an item of a vehicle. HVAC system is an item of the vehicle. Of course, it's a bit open to interpretation, so each vehicle manufacturer or each supplier can choose to define an item in a specific way. For example, the whole body control model, which of course is part of multiple systems, can be also treated as an item. But as a good recommendation, we normally tell our customers to treat a single item as a single, let's say, functionality of a vehicle. And well, again, we are talking about cybersecurity risk management through the whole life cycle of the product or the vehicle itself. So we start at the concept phase, we move to product development, production, operation, and maintenance. So the ISO 21434 is structured in 15 different chapters, but actually the requirements are only starting from chapter 5, also called clause 5. I'm not going now to focus on all of them, because basically if you open the standard, you can see the definition of different clauses, and they're quite self-explanatory. Just see some examples here. The big parts of the requirements, for example, include clause 15 about threat analysis and risk assessment methods, or clause 5 talks about specifically organizational cybersecurity management. And here on the slide, you also see that some of the clauses have more requirements than the others. What I would like to talk about a bit more about, let's say, specific things that you see in ISO 21434 comparing to different standards. So important thing to keep in mind here, all those clauses that we just saw, 10 of them, they have the same structure. So all the clauses, they start with the general description and objective of the clause. Then it talks about required inputs and supporting information. So in most cases, all the clauses, they actually link together. So if you're talking about threat and risk assessment clause, of course, it requires you the input from the design phase, where you see the design of the product that you want to do threat and risk assessment on. Then the main, of course, part of the standard are requirements themselves. So the big section of the clause is actually talking about requirements and recommendation, and each of the clauses have multiple requirements. So also each requirement has a specific naming format. So you can see it here on the slide. So it goes RQ, then there is a number of the clause, and then there is a number of the requirement. So if we're talking about first requirement from clause 5, it will be RQ 0501. So sometimes when you see some references to ISO 21434 and it's sometimes not clear what they mean, it's just simply a requirement coming from a specific clause and specific number of that requirement. And the last part of each clause is also a big part and really important. And this is one of the reasons why ISO 21434 is a good standard that is quite easy to implement. It actually talks about the work products, or so-called outcomes of each clause. So work product is more or less your deliverable. So you make sure that you implement the requirements, and in the end, after that, you need to create some kind of a deliverable. It can be a report, it can be some form of a template. So the ISO 21434 specifically tells you what you need to do. And the idea is the same. Each work product has a naming in the following format. You can see it on the slide. It says WP, again, the number of the clause, number of the work product. So certain clauses has maybe 10, 15 work products. Some can only have one. For example, if we're talking about the testing part, in this case, you will have only one work product, and this work product will be your testing report. Then here, a bit of a summary of what we see in the, let's say, in comparison between OEMs and Tier 1 and Tier 2 suppliers. So some important things to mention here is that clause 5 and 6, I'm not going to focus on those because those are applicable for everyone. But starting from clause 7, the applicability differs. So clause 7 talks about the supply chain interaction, right? So as you can imagine, of course, the supply chain can go, let's say, ultimately to Tier 10 supplier. But important thing to keep in mind for you as a supplier, officially, at least if we're talking about specific type approvals, so we currently work with the Dutch one, Swedish one, they specifically mention that you don't need to go deeper than Tier 2 suppliers. In most cases, you can even stop at Tier 1. So in this case, if you're a Tier 2 supplier, you don't really need to prove compliance of your Tier 2 supplier because it's not mandated by the regulation. It doesn't mean that you don't do it. It just means that it's not really mandated. Your vehicle manufacturer to which you supply in the end will not ask you for the evidence. So that's why here we put case by case, because of course it's always a good cybersecurity practice to make sure that you implement the cybersecurity. Again, not mandatory. For clause 8, again, it's applicable for everyone. Then we talk about clause 9, and that's when we're only talking about OEMs. So for both tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, it's not applicable due to the fact that clause 9 is talking about the concept phase. And the concept phase is where you actually think about your vehicle as a whole system, right? So of course, in this case, as a vehicle manufacturer, that's where the responsibility lies. So you say, okay, I'm going to create a vehicle which will have 10 different systems. It will have a brake system, lighting system, and so on. And then you start distributing the requirements from your different systems towards your suppliers. But of course, the responsibility of creating this concept design only lies with OEMs. Then we move to clause 10. And here we see that, for example, for OEM themselves, this is a case-by-case basis whether it's applicable or not. And why is that? Because clause 10 is actually talking about product development. Well, not all the vehicle manufacturers develop the product themselves. There are some vehicle manufacturers that basically just treat their vehicle as a Lego. So they take different parts of different suppliers, they connect it all together, then they have their final product. But of course, when we're talking about tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, that's where we are talking about the product development requirements. Then we are going to move to clause 11. So clause 11 is applicable for all the OEMs, but only partially for tier 1 and tier 2. And why is that? Well, because in this case, clause 11 is specifically linked to clause 9, because it's talking about the validation of the vehicle functionality, right? So of course, the ultimate responsibility for validation on the vehicle level lies within the OEM. However, of course, in this case, in order for the vehicle manufacturers to be able to validate their whole vehicle, they need to have the results of validation testing from tier 1, and tier 1 will ask those from tier 2. So that's why, let's say, officially, it is not mandated. However, because of the fact that OEM will ask for this, the responsibility partially also lies on tier 1 and tier 2. Then for the clause 12, or we're talking about the production, of course, fully applicable for the vehicle because that's where the production is happening. However, when we're talking about tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, it's only applicable in the cases where suppliers actually produce any hardware. Because especially for tier 2 suppliers, in many cases, they only develop the software. Well, if you only develop the software, there is no production in place. So of course, in this case, this clause is not applicable. So again, the focus is only for hardware products. And then for clauses 13, 14, and 15, I will not even stop there because it's applicable for everyone. Okay, now we are moving to the last chapter. So here, this is basically the most important part. We are going to talk about expectations from the supply chain. Some, let's say, high-level recommendations here. It's a really time-consuming for both suppliers and OEMs to ensure that they align their expectations with the contractual agreements in place. And again, we are talking here about ISO 21434 because it really has a good methodology, which is easy to take and implement if you really don't know where to start from. A lot of suppliers, because they were not used to have cybersecurity in place, they don't know how to start. And as I mentioned before, the market now moves toward direction of ISO 21434 standard, as I say, the state-of-the-art approach for cybersecurity and engineering of the vehicles. And well, when we are talking about OEMs and when they want to have the type approval for their vehicle, well, they will ask a supplier for the whole set of evidence. So there are a few topics, the main important topics, let's say, that need to be agreed between the OEM and the supplier. So here we see a table on the screen, which basically has a correlation between the topic of UNECE R155 regulation and how you can implement the requirements using ISO 21434 standard. So as I mentioned before, there is a really direct link between the requirements from UNECE and ISO 21434. So first, let's take a look at the agreement for security training and governance on the supplier side. Well, remember we discussed different clauses. So you can directly implement clause 5, which is talking about organizational cybersecurity management. I can guarantee you, if you implement this ISO 21434 clause correctly, you fully cover all the requirements on that topic from R155. The second important topic, and I would say this is one of the biggest topics overall for both OEMs, but also for suppliers, is the risk assessment and all the evidence related to that, and of course the testing evidence. Because as you can imagine, for each OEM, the scope of the risk assessment and testing includes both the vehicle systems, but also the backend systems. Now, most of the vehicles are heavily connected. So there is always some kind of a backend and cloud infrastructure involved. So some examples of what we see from our clients, that around 100 systems, back-end systems, were in scope. For each of those, the evidence was requested from the suppliers to prove that they actually compliant with UNECE. So this is a really big topic. But good news here, you can still use ISO 21434 to show your compliance. There's a large clause 15, which specifically talks about threat and risk assessment, also called TARA. And the clause 11, we already briefly touched it, which talks about cybersecurity validation. And we talked about that, well, from a perspective of a supplier, you need to be able to provide your evidence to OEM. The next big topic is the agreement for the security monitoring activities. So what do we mean by monitoring activities? Well, we are talking about vulnerability analysis. So we are talking about the fact that on a constant basis, you check that your product is still secure. Again, there is a clause in ISO 21434 that tells you how to implement that requirements. It's clause 8, which is talking about continual cybersecurity activities. And the last one is the agreement for incident response process. Here, the clause 13 comes into play, and it talks about operations and maintenance. I will not focus too much on that slide. Just for you, again, it's basically the link between the same clauses and different more products and the topics of the evidence that OEM will request. And here again, quite straightforward for each of the evidence that OEM will request or already requests from a supplier, there are work products from the ISO 21434 that you can use. So some big advice that we always give our clients, suppliers as the advice, but also for OEM, always start discussing with OEMs as early as possible about what do they expect from you on R155 thing. Because in the end, you need to show the proactive approach. Because in the end, all the vehicle manufacturers will come to you with the same questions. Are you compliant with R155? And how can you prove that you are compliant? Work already on obtaining those agreements in place between you as a supplier and your OEM, or you as a tier 2 supplier and your tier 1 supplier. Because you can imagine that there will be several rounds of negotiation between the OEM and supplier to clearly define the responsibilities. Work on creating the necessary evidence that you can further share with your OEM. And of course, make sure that you have sufficient time, but also resources for these activities, because it's not a simple activity. You really have to think about cybersecurity from the very beginning, from where you start developing your process to the moment where you have the decomposition of the product. A couple of slides and a couple of remarks on the risk management. Again, because this is a really big topic in ISO 21434 and R155, it really has a good method. Implement it, use the work product as your evidence, and then this topic is fully covered. Same goes for testing and validation. OEM will request the evidence of your testing. And well, they will ask for that just because the technical service will ask from OEM to provide this evidence. Another thing to keep in mind that technical service sometimes even will retest some of the implemented tests. And also final words on the advice here. The biggest chunk of time will be taken by completing the risk assessment. So because you need to complete the risk assessment in several rounds, and you need to complete it for each of the product that you actually develop. Again, good interaction between OEM suppliers, tier 1 suppliers, tier 2 suppliers. You really need to have clear definition of the roles and responsibilities there. Reserve time. Make sure that you have dedicated resources and time to implement cybersecurity requirements. Create from the very beginning the list of documents that you want to create. Confirm with OEM that this is okay for them. And what we really see right now is that ISO 21434 will likely be the industry norm in the future. So use it, use the good practices that it offers. So, few slides on the impact on suppliers. How can you prepare goods? Again, start in time with understanding the expectation, take sufficient time, and be prepared. So, what is the next step? Well, regulation has been already into force from 2021, and actually from July to 2022, it's already mandatory for the new vehicle types in Europe. From 2024, it will be mandatory for all vehicle types. So the time is now to actually make sure that you are compliant. And that actually closes my presentation.
Very well. Anna, thank you very much. I hope everybody had the opportunity to take notes, and thank you for those that presented the questions. Before moving ahead, you still see on screen some of the interesting changes that are coming ahead. Anna said something very important at the beginning of this presentation. This is not just a plaster that you put on an open wound. This is a journey that you take as an evolution into adopting cybersecurity measures that will not only protect your company, it will protect your partner, your suppliers, and the OEMs that you are actually working with. Our capability of working and providing these services has been recognized in different homologation countries such as the Netherlands, Cyprus, and recently in Sweden. Today we work with OEMs across Europe and the world, same for tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. What you can find with us is that we will provide you a customized training and workshop. We will be working with you in order to understand where you are at the start of your journey with a gap analysis, like mentioned by Anna earlier. We will look into the gaps that we identify. We work with you in order to understand what is the best way forward. We will also be able to provide you with pre-audits in order to make sure that you are in the right place before going into certification. All of the above, it's something that is done tailor-made to your reality, and in order to make sure that whatever steps you need to take, it will be taken for good in order to bring you to certification. If you want to know more about our services and the information that Anna has provided you before, I invite you to visit our website, www.secura.com. You will find there different type of information. There will be also webinars that you can look at, white papers that you can download, and obviously our information where you can contact us as a follow-up of this information. Allow me also to remind you that we are planning for a training on ISO 21434 and the UNECE R155 during the summer period. So please connect to our website, send us some information if you're interested, and we will be more than glad to then follow up. Now, I would like to also open the door to question and answers, and I would like to, well, first of all, thank you all of you that have already posted some of the questions. I will start with the question from Shlomo asking, it is mandatory to be certified based on ISO 21434 as a supplier to show compliance with the UNECE 155 regulation? Anna.
Thanks, Antonio. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, no, it's not mandatory to be certified based on ISO 21434 standard. However, as I already mentioned, what we see right now on the market, that ISO 21434 is already treated as a state-of-the-art approach, but we see that it will be even further implemented as the main standard. And who knows, maybe with the evolution of the regulation, this standard will also become basically your way to prove the compliance.
Very good. Thanks, Anna. Thank you, Shlomo, for the question. The next one is from Natalie. Would you recommend an IATF assessor to audit against ISO 21434 or an ISO 27001 qualified auditor?
I would say that ISO 27001 is a bit more, let's say, global and talks specifically about organizational security. And ISO 21434 is really focusing on the technical aspects and really focusing on the engineering part. So ideally, the combination of both, because in this case, you actually cover technology by ISO 21434, and then you cover the knowledge of technological processes. And then you combine it with the knowledge of ISO 27001, where you focus on the people and process side.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie, for the question. The next question is from Albert. If it is not mandatory, then what are the benefits of certification based on ISO 21434? Anna.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite questions. Actually, I already mentioned quite a few advantages of ISO 21434, but I really believe that the biggest advantage that when you show this certification to your OEM, they will not ask you further questions, because you can put your agreement in place and say, well, if you prove us that you are ISO 21434 compliant, that's it. We don't have to discuss anything else. We don't have to negotiate. So in this case, the process of negotiation, the contractual agreements, which I mentioned before, takes a while, is really limited to only showing the certificate.
Thank you. Thank you, Albert, for the question. I have another question from Natalie in relation to the ISO 21434. Is that more needed by the tier suppliers or by the OEMs?
So it's actually needed by both. So remember, we saw this kind of a table of comparison, basically, of applicability of the requirements from ISO 21434 for OEMs and Tier 1. So in this case, what we also see with our clients, it's both OEMs and Tier 1 and even Tier 2 suppliers, because in the end, this is our standard and this is our market.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie, again for the question. Allow me to take the word 1 second, because many of those questions, of course, are on top of mind of every participant, being a tier or an OEM. One of the elements that you need to take into account is urgency. We are getting to half of 2023. In order to make sure, depending on your starting point, on a gap analysis, remediation path, and then readiness to a certification, there is time, and time is becoming limited, considering that in 2024, like Anna was mentioning and showing earlier in the presentation, you need to be ready. So one of the elements that you need to take into account in your planning for the second half of 2023 is how ready are you? How conscious you are of the current situation that you are in, your company or the ecosystem within which you're providing services. And depending on this, then it is time to take some decisions and do some planning. What we can offer you is actually the possibility to sit with us, present you with some of the experience that we have, and make sure that whatever is today on your roadmaps will actually match the requirements that will be coming in the coming year. On our website, you can find all the information mentioned above. This webinar is recorded, therefore we will make it available as well. But generic information answer to generic questions. Your reality is specific. Therefore, do not hesitate to contact us, and then we will be able to provide you any specific answers that you might require. Anna, any final words?
I think I said it all.
You did.
Thanks.
You did. No, it's very good. Timing is running out from our side, so thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the questions, but most importantly, we look forward to hear from you, and do contact us, do present us with your business case. Our current footprint is all around Europe and the world. Therefore, we can share with you our direct experience of your particular industry and geography. Thank you so much for participating, and we look forward to hear from you and answer all your questions.
Thanks. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.